was sworn in on February 7th of this year as the Special Envoy for Strategic Stability and Missile Defense. She was sworn in as the Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security in June of 2009. Before that, she had represented California's 10th Congressional District for 13 years in the House of Representatives. She chaired the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Strategic Forces, so knows a little bit about strategic stability and arms control. And before winning a seat in Congress, many people don't know this as well, Undersecretary Tauscher spent 14 years working on Wall Street, and she was one of the first women to hold a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. So that, I think, qualifies Undersecretary Tauscher to talk about a wide range of the issues that we've discussed, including the austere fiscal circumstances that are constraining our security efforts. So without further ado, I think I'll let Undersecretary Tauscher speak for a couple of minutes.
Sure.
And then,
or you can ask me a question. And
all right, or I can ask you a question. So we heard earlier that, and I've discussed this with some of you, that the few Cold War relics that we're still dealing with, and one of them is the day-to-day relationship that we maintain with Russia regarding this set of questions, the issue of the strategic nuclear balance. And so a question that has arisen is, what are the ways we can change this relationship? Why do we have our nuclear postures on hair-trigger alert, focused on each other as if it were still the 1960s and the height of the Cold War? Are there things that we can do to change the nature of this relationship so at least this element of our postures and our strategies are not focused on each other as the day-to-day, daily threat and the enemy? And so that would be the first question I would ask you, Undersecretary Tauscher. How do we get through this? How do we change this strange artifact of another time?
Well, thank you, and it's wonderful to be here with all of you. I was happy to be here yesterday and have had the chance to say hello to some of you personally. Hope to get to know more of you as time goes by. As Barry said, I left my full-time job as Undersecretary in February, but stayed as a special envoy to manage parts of my former responsibilities, including the strategic dialogue between the United States and Russia on strategic stability. There's a presidential commission. It was President Medvedev and President Obama, and now it's President Putin and President Obama. And that commission has about 13 different elements and working groups, and I chair the Arms Control Strategic Stability group with my Russian counterpart, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov. So I maintain that responsibility, although I'm part-time. And I also work on missile defense cooperation. No good deed goes unpunished. So I just want to make clear that I'm not a full-time undersecretary any longer. But I think Barry's point is very well taken. I was 60 in November, and I'm old enough to be somebody that probably I may be even older than your own parents. I did duck and cover drills as I was growing up. And I grew up in New Jersey in a place where the dead vote Democratic, in the same flight path of Newark Airport. So you imagine being 5 or 6 or 7 years old and being told to get underneath this little wooden desk that really an adult could have sat on and made it fall over, and that this was going to protect me. And then you'd hear an airplane come overhead. So our imaginations were pretty much exercised at the time that the Russians were coming. And we all know that during those times of mutually assured destruction, we all know that the Soviet Union fell. We know that the Russian Federation stood up, and that we've had 12, 14 years of a different maturing relationship with the Russian Federation. We work closely together on many different things. We are members of the P5 of the UN Security Council. For those reasons alone, we are together with our other allies on a number of issues that are fundamentally important to international security. But we also work together clearly on Afghanistan. We work closely on Iran. We work closely on many different issues, including economic and energy security issues. But our relationship is still characterized by mutually assured destruction. And in many ways, our relationship has a default position of an arms race, There are still many in bureaucracies, mostly in the former Soviet Union and the Russian Federation, but we also have some of our own people who kind of feel comfortable with the way the relationship has been for many, many decades. That's unsustainable, not only because we don't target each other, but also because we have many other threats that we actually have to work to array ourselves and invest against and make sure that we are leveraging the capabilities of others who have assets, including sensors downrange and more close to where the threat might be, that could really help us have a more robust security. So what do we call this new thing that we could have, and how do we define it, and what are we trying to do about it? So we define it in the Obama administration as moving from mutually assured destruction to a world of mutually assured stability. And stability is a word that is very specifically desirous because it does not say that we are going to all of a sudden switch over to a place where we are acquiescent of each other on everything. Clearly we're not. There are many different issues between the Russian Federation, the United States, and our allies and partners to which we are at odds. But there is a growing sweet spot in the middle that we are still defining, where we have a common view, where we have common threats, where we have common solutions, and where there is an opportunity for both interoperability and for an agreed cooperation, where those things start to devolve us away from mutually assured destruction to a much more reasonable, predictable, and less hostile relationship of mutually assured stability. And those are the talks that I manage with my Russian counterpart. They are a part of a big umbrella. Clearly, missile defense is an element for us to help make that transition. Interestingly, as both Secretary Albright and as Liz mentioned, all of these things are bureaucratic, they're policy, and they are politics. And so where we find the seams between politics and policy, and where we deal with bureaucracies that are entrenched and have long-standing relationships, but many of them are characterized by hostility, by rudeness, by mistreatment, you've got to get to a place of trust. And trust is a very big word. I'm talking about the little t trust, not the big T trust. But part of trust is to break the paradigms of these relationships. We in the Obama administration used, when I was Undersecretary, the New START treaty was negotiated under my auspices. I was there for 23 days as a hostage, pretty much, in February, March of 2010 to close the treaty and get it ratified. And we did in a very tough time at the end of the lame duck session of 2010. We were able to do that for many reasons, including the fact that we marketed the treaty as a U.S.-Russia treaty. We called it our treaty. And we didn't do things that had been characterized by previous negotiations, like going home and acting as if we had taken over the other guy and, really abused the other guy. We were very clear that we hadn't done that. But part of the opportunity is to deal with the things in the Obama administration. The choice was to use the reset, which was an obvious effort to better the relationships between the Russian Federation and the United States on this sweet spot area of finding places where we can cooperate and coordinate and work together. We used the reset to get the New START treaty done, and then when we got it ratified and put into place in February of 2011, it's been in place for now over a year. We have used that to better the relations, to deal with the things. Ridiculous things used to happen. In the treaty, there are things that say, you have 48 hours to do this inspection, and you're meant to notify 72 hours beforehand, and you're meant to do this. And it was always just a little off. And they would just do this to each other. And it was on very low levels. And it was basically a hostility of an adversary relationship. Those things are so unhelpful, but they are long-lasting, and they stay inside of people. And so if you've got people that are working in this missile field or this test area, and they're going to be visited by the Russians all year long, they're going to see those same faces. And if it's a hostile relationship, those things actually stay with those people, and then they get promoted, and then they may end up 15 years later on a negotiating team. And so their feelings are very personal. And so I think on both of our sides, we have realized that the little T trust is a lot about interpersonal relationships, about treating each other not so much in an adversarial way, but also to put together bridging mechanisms in these agreements so that we put our best face forward, that we actually send the message to treat each other respectfully and professionally, and to try to make sure that we're not making the same mistakes that we made during the height of the Cold War. Those things take a lot of time. That's why it's important to move from mutually assured destruction to mutually assured stability in a political sense. And that means the assumption of political risk by both leaders in the United States and in the Russian Federation, and a political narrative that has to be developed as to why this is good, why it's important, which is always difficult, especially when you have elections and where domestic political conversations sometimes use the other person as a cudgel or the other state as a cudgel or as a bad example for some kind of international cooperation. So it's a very challenging environment, but we believe that it's important to make sure that the relationship reflects the reality. The reality is that the Russian Federation and the United States do not target each other, especially when it comes to missile defense. Missile defense is arrayed against threats outside of Europe. Russia is in Europe, and mostly to the Middle East, and about countries that have made threats to the United States and to our NATO allies, and that this is an opportunity for Russia to come in and cooperate on something that is of mutual benefit and mutual opportunity, considering the kind of threats that we share and the proliferation of short, medium, and intermediate range missiles throughout the Middle East.
Thank you, Ellen. Let me ask one follow-up, but as I'm doing so, if those who would like to ask questions would like to stream to the microphones, we'll turn to your questions quickly. The follow-up is on an issue on which you're perhaps the most expert of anyone in the entire United States right now, and that is what would it take to get Russia to say yes to cooperate on missile defense? Why aren't they, and what will it take? Is it even possible?
Well, what I have said consistently is that my time on Wall Street was exemplified by doing a lot of IPOs and a lot of deals with Silicon Valley, and then I was actually in California not too far away. And I think the hallmark of a deal is not only doing a deal where you can represent to yourself and your equities that you have done a good job, but that the other side of the table feels as if that's a good deal for them, which means that they weren't abused. And that the hallmark of a good deal is whether that person will do a deal with you the next day. And our relationship with the Russian Federation is multiple deals a day, not just whether they want to do a deal with us tomorrow or next week, but there's many, many, many different layers of the relationship and many, many different parts of the transactional things that we do all day where we have to be cooperative and working and listening and understanding. That takes a tremendous amount of understanding of the other person's point of view. With President Putin coming in, he was prime minister. It's not like he was in the opposition. He clearly was part of the previous administration. We have made clear to the Russians that the system that we have developed in Europe, which is the European phased adapted approach, is not arrayed toward them. It is not capable to hold their strategic arsenal at risk, either their ICBMs or SLBMs. It's based on the SM-3, which is a 25-year-old Navy rocket, which is very robust. It's been very well tested, but it's not so robust. It can hold at risk nascent, emerging technologies from smaller states, places like Iran, but it certainly couldn't deal with a big state, big power, big technology state like the Russian Federation, and it doesn't have the ability to hold them at risk. There's some dispute as to whether the Russians really believe us or not. That's part of the big T problem. I think that geography and physics don't lie. They can think I do, but physics doesn't lie. Physics is a pure science, and I think that they're beginning to understand, as you know, Barry, from our time in the White House, they're beginning to see that the physics is really clear, that the SM-3 missile is capable enough to hold at risk Iranian and other Middle Eastern threats that we have, but not certainly the Russian Federation, and that we're working hard to make sure that they understand that missile defense cooperation is a game changer for both of us. It changes the orientation of our relationship. It changes the way we cooperate on an existing platform where everybody can get in on the ground floor, in the door at the same time. The Russians would be in a parity situation with our NATO allies. We would have the Russians protect Russia. We would protect NATO. There would be sharing of sensor data and fusing of information. We would all sit at the same monitors. It would be very, very transparent. Coming on board would show the Russians exactly what our intentions are. Should they find out between now and 2015, when our next deployment is, that we're not telling the truth, they could leave. That would be enormously embarrassing to us. So I think that there's a real opportunity here, but it's going to take a political narrative and a political decision on the part of the Russian Federation that this is something that they want to do. They have to see the benefit of it. They have to have a narrative that will explain that to the people. And then the bureaucracy is going to have to turn around and change so that it can be accepting of a kind of cooperation that in the past has not really been part of their default position, which is to be arrayed against us very much like an arms control race.
Thank you very much, Ellen.
Thank you.
Why don't we take a couple questions, since I know this is somewhat of a shortened session, and I'll be regionally egalitarian and take one from the middle and one from the side over there first. So go ahead, Joshua.
Thanks. I'm Joshua Faust. I'm a Young Atlanticist. I'm also with a think tank called the American Security Project. I really appreciate your comments about the need to create political narrative and engage with the politics of de-escalating the relationship between Russia and the United States. But there are also political issues within the United States as well, and de-escalating the more hawkish elites or politicians or pundits who don't believe in the ideals of the reset or don't believe in the concepts supporting the New START Treaty. And I was wondering if you could comment a little bit about how we could de-escalate the American political scene as well, the desire within American politics to maintain a rivalrous or some kind of hostile relationship towards Russia, and how you could begin creating that same kind of political narrative that de-escalates tensions within the U.S. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a great question. And the truth of the matter is we have a very strong bipartisan agreement, both on the benefits of missile defense cooperation with Russia and on the New START Treaty. The Bush administration was talking to the Russians about missile defense cooperation, and we had George Shultz, Henry Kissinger. We had a number of nonpartisan, formally affiliated to one team or the other, not wearing their team colors all the time, statespeople, in my opinion, who came out strongly for the New START Treaty. So, I think as a former politician who used to perform the dark arts regularly and with some success, I will say that one of the reasons why the Scowcroft Center, in my opinion, is so attractive is that what we would like to get back to in a new way, because everything has to be new and should be, is the sense of nonpartisan foreign policy and ... national security, international security. You can tinge things any way you want, and you can stamp your foot and you can claim who's strong and who's weak. I even think the word hawkish, I consider myself a democratic hawk, but I think that word is even something that sets people a little teeth at edge. I think what's important is that things are looked at for the benefit to the United States national security, for the projection of our values, for the protection of our allies and our partners, and for the benefit of relationships that are less tension-ridden and more predictable. And that's where we stand. That's where we have stood consistently. That's why we have bipartisan support. Do we have everybody? You're never going to get everybody. And, not to call the people that are not for us, either on the far left or the far right, fringy. I would never do that. But I will say that they are in the minority.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much. Why don't we take two questions at a time now, one from there and one from there. You want to go ahead?
Thank you very much. I'm Peter Pindiak. I'm a delegate from Slovakia.
Hi, Peter.
My question is about missile defense and its connection to outer space, which has become an increasingly contested domain in military affairs. And although the DDPR approved yesterday reinstated that the system is of purely defensive nature, we all know that some parts of the systems, some interceptors and sensors, do have some other capabilities, and I'm alluding to anti-satellite capabilities. My question is, how much does the domain of outer space play a role in strategic calculations within the missile defense debate, and how do we mitigate Russian concerns that the system does not go beyond its purely defensive nature in the years to come? Thank you.
Peter, that's a very good question. First and foremost, keep in mind that the EPAA system is a kinetic system. So it doesn't have any detonator explosive. It basically is a bang. These are defensive systems that are used to create a sense of deterrent and to hold at risk those states that choose to be outliers and to make threats. And that it is a robust capability to hold at risk nascent systems and emerging countries, but not big countries and not big systems and sophisticated systems with countermeasures and other things. The United States did have a circumstance where we had a system that we had done a satellite shot and it started to fall out, and we were very worried about the thorium that was there that could actually fall and kill people. And so we did take that down, but we took it down in a very transparent way. And so it's not we don't have an anti-satellite system. We had a capability that we used to prevent what we thought could have been real injury and harm to people. I think that what's important is that we continue to work with our European allies on a space code of conduct. We want that to be very transparent and opportunistic, and I very much welcome our opportunity to work with our European allies on that.
Thanks very much, Ellen. Question over here.
Hi.
Hi.
Do you go by Congressman, Undersecretary? What title do you prefer?
She prefers Vice Chair Designate of the Scowcross Center.
All right, that makes sense to me.
But you can call me Ellen.
Vice Chair Designate of the Scowcross Center.
Just call me Ellen, please.
My name is Alexander Slater. I'm a Young Atlanticist, and a number of years ago, I too served on Capitol Hill as a staffer and in a foreign policy role, so I saw the mix of the dark arts and foreign policy up close together as you've experienced. My question today, though, is a little bit more technical. In particular, the Obama administration, it's been written that the president's long-term hope is essentially for a substantial reduction in nuclear forces and ultimately phasing out of nuclear weapons altogether. And you discussed earlier that the system on missile defense that's being set up in Europe is one that is targeted at halting threats from nascent systems, but would not be able
outside of Europe.
Outside of Europe, pardon me. It's aimed at targeting or halting threats from nascent systems, but not sophisticated systems such as the one in Russia.
It just doesn't have that capability.
Right. So to what extent, though, does this create an incentive for countries with sophisticated nuclear missile systems not to dismantle them? Because in a sense, you've now set up a system that can eliminate the threat from systems that are below a certain technical level, but not ones that are above a certain technical level. Right. So if these states want to remain powerful, essentially, and not sort of be disempowered by the system, the incentive is there for them to maintain their nuclear structures rather than eliminate them.
Since we're on a first-name basis, can I restate your question?
Absolutely.
All right, because I think you're really onto something. Alexander, is that you?
Yes, ma'am.
I think the way to restate the question isn't what people are going to do about maintaining their systems, because the United States and Russia have continuing talks both about strategic, non-strategic, deployed, non-deployed, which includes tactical, obviously. And we want to get back to the table and talk about them. President Obama wasn't the first president to talk about going to zero, but he was the first president to put a blueprint out there on how to do it and to really frame the decision, I think appropriately, about the ambitions of doing it, but warning that it would take patience and persistence and may not happen in his lifetime. But that it is a goal, and that's part of our agreement in the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The way I would reframe your question is, what is the relationship between offensive and defensive? And do things like missile defense, which is a fairly new paradigm, do they blur the line and do they cause concern? In the preamble of the New START Treaty, as we had in the START Treaty, we made very clear, the United States and Russia, that there is an interrelationship between offensive and defensive. And missile defense is exhibit number one of what that is. And where exactly does it fit? And that's why it is very, very important that we continue these strategic stability talks and actually get someplace on it. Because the world and technology and the kinds of armaments and the kinds of offensive and defensive systems that we have continue to be a race of technology and have the capability of being confused and confusing for both allies and for adversaries. And so what's important is that you have this looking at the person across the table, and that they actually know what you're talking about. They actually know that when you're talking about a missile defense system based on the SM-3 system, that it has these kinds of capabilities and that it really can't do anything more. So the idea that it undercuts Russia's strategic SLBM and ICBM force is not true, and that the physics are actually real and believable. But these conversations have to be broader, and they have to be built on a mutual respect and trust and a sense of predictability and a sense that you're coming into the same foxhole together, that you're looking at these different new and emerging threats and new and emerging technical capabilities, these alliances that people are growing, the fact that the world is shrinking, that there is more interoperability than there is necessarily integration. And so how do we start to understand what is over there and what is over there? It's not like that anymore. It's more like it's coming like this. So these conversations are very, very important. If the United States and the Russian Federation can come to an agreement sometime in the future between now and 2015 about missile defense cooperation, it will be a game changer. It will say that we're going to work to begin to trust each other, little t, a little bit more, that we're going to take down the kind of stovepipe relationships and the predictability of an arms race. My 10-foot fence caused you to build an 11-foot ladder. Can't afford that anymore. I can't afford to be doing that, not against the Russian Federation. I have other threats that I've got to array myself in and make investments to. And so we have to, in the way we think of doing that, maybe somebody's got a better idea, is to define this sweet spot where we can say common threat, common view, common assessment, common platform, common opportunity, build some trust, build cooperation. If we can do that on missile defense, I believe that it will begin to change the tenor of the relationship, and it will take down the sense of, a turbulence that can be in the relationship for one reason or another. There will always be turbulence in these relationships because things like Syria will happen, things like Libya will happen. We will not always get it right. But the basis of the relationship has to have enough predictability so that our friends and allies, especially in Europe, that are between geographically the United States and Russia, will understand that not every time we disagree, it becomes a fight, because we frankly can't afford it.
Thanks, Helen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gergely Varga, Young Atlanticist from Hungary. Yesterday I posed a question for a defense minister from Central and Eastern Europe on NATO's current nuclear posture review, and the answer was clearly that from their perspective that NATO still needs U.S. tactical nuclear weapons in Europe. Do you agree with this notion? How do you see U.S. position evolving on this issue?
Well, it's an evolving position, as you know, and I think there's some decisions perhaps taken yesterday, but I think what's important is that we continue to have this evolve, and we understand exactly what it means to deal with these issues in a way. We were very clear. We said that the United States would not do anything preemptively or unilaterally, like taking things out or moving them in, and that our conversations with the Russian Federation are about reducing weapons, so that we have to understand exactly in our partnership what exactly it means to have a nuclear NATO, and what it exactly means to what kind of deployments we're going to have and maintain, and what it means exactly for Russia. I think a lot of our European allies that say that they want the United States to keep weapons in Europe want the Russians to move theirs. And these are things that are obviously linked together. They're not separate. So we have to find a way to rationalize both of those things.
I think we have time for one more question. Unfortunately, I'd like to talk all day about this, but we cannot.
Hi, Harper Dorsk. I'm here with International Model NATO, and I also am associated with the American Security Project. I'm curious, from the Russian perspective, what, if any, incentive do the Russians have to ever abandon a mutually assured destruction capability? What incentive do they have to abandon that, at least within the next century? And in the event Russia ever joined NATO, what do you think would be the future of their strategic rocket forces and arsenal? Thanks.
I think that's a great question. The things are, damn expensive. It is I represented the congressional district, and the only one in the United States with 2 national nuclear labs in it, Livermore and Sandia, California. And I have 10,000 of the smartest people in the world, not because they elected me 7 times, that was a nice coincidence, but they literally can make you glow in the dark. And they are really, sciences, all kinds of scientists and engineers at the labs. And but we spend in the United States billions of dollars a year maintaining our force because, as everyone knows, they have to be safe, reliable, and effective. So the mutually assured destruction piece of the relationship is a Cold War vestige. How we manage our arsenals and how we posture them will be underneath the opportunity of mutually assured stability. It's just a different way of looking at it. And until those decisions are made by people elected president and in both countries, we will continue, as the president has said, to have a safe, reliable, and effective nuclear arsenal until the desired is to go down to 0. And he has said that may take patience and persistence and may not happen in his lifetime. But I don't think that they are mutually adverse to each other, moving away from mutually assured destruction to mutually assured stability at the same time that we work together to have proportionality and some parity to the way we manage the drawdown of our nuclear forces between the United States and Russia.
Well, Ellen, thank you very much
My pleasure.
for addressing these truly, I think, historic and geostrategic issues, as well as the very technical ones that underpin them. So thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
And thank you for coming here.
No, thank you very much. Thank you.
We now have a 10-minute break in the corridor. Enjoy your tea and coffee.